The first pulse struck midway through the station's morning swell, 3 seconds of impossible wait, gravity reversing and tossing commuters skyward like startled birds. Leela Vey spun in the air, clamping her wrist against the curved wall, watching droplets of coffee arc past her face and vanish into the crowd's slow-motion tumble. Her eyes tracked the only unmoving figure, Cale, hood drawn low, the faint hum of his implants resonating just beyond normal hearing. Then gravity remembered itself. They slammed down hard, shoes squealing against the synth metal floor, as the crowd broke into scattered curses and dizzy laughter. But Leela knew the pulse wasn't a glitch. She'd seen what a failed reality mesh looked like before, in her early days calibrating the city frame's quantum fields. This one was she pulled Cale into a side tunnel, past the flickering Modad panels, forcing him into the dim alcove behind the vent shrouds. "Tell me it's not what I think it is." His silence gnawed at her. "You sold it," she said finally, the words jagged. "Fragments of the bridge layer between us. I can feel gaps, Cale. Whole thought corridors missing." Cale half smiled, but it was brittle. "Not sold," he murmured. "Traded. The underground has uses for identity you could never imagine. They splice, recombine, sell a test pilot's reflexes to a gambler who needs faster tells, swap grief out of someone who can't carry it. I gave them. Us. Just enough to keep a door open." "Open to what?" He hesitated, gaze darting beyond her shoulder as distant alarms began their undulating cry. The pulse had awoken something in the city frame's skin-deep resonances, structural code bending under invisible hands. "You think this place runs on infrastructure," Cale said. "But it runs on us, on all of us. And now the market wants a larger cut. Another pulse, weaker this time, but sharp enough to make the tunnel's dust tremble in midair. Somewhere beyond the walls, whole neighborhoods were colliding in psychic disarray, people half-speaking in foreign tongues they'd never learned, recalling childhoods that weren't theirs. Leela's heartbeat thrummed loud in her ears. She could already feel slivers of herself drifting, stitched to someone else's mind stream and tugged toward its memories. Cale's presence felt different, too, slightly offset, like his outline didn't quite fit his body. "This fracture," she said, "we can stop it. You know the pathways back." Cale looked at her with something between regret and defiance. "If we stop it, we close the market's doors forever. That means every traded piece is lost. Yours, mine, all of them. Those still stitched together, hanging on, they'll come apart." The alarm's pitch climbed. In the far distance, through the tunnel mouth, light warped as if the air was remembering another dimension entirely. "You have to decide," Cale whispered. "Restore us, or keep the hybrids breathing." Leela stepped back, her boots crunching shattered glass from a maintenance bot's broken lens. Gravity hummed faintly underfoot, unstable, authored moment to moment by some unseen will. She stared into Cale's altered eyes, knowing that whichever choice she made would rewrite them both, and maybe the city forever. She opened her mouth to speak, but the next pulse hit harder, tearing the breath from her lungs, and the world folded in on itself. Sound became a dense, molten thing, pressing down from every direction, weaving itself through the bones in her skull. Light surged like an ocean breaking against invisible cliffs, sharp, prismatic waves that fractured the market square into floating shards of impossible geometry. Her knees buckled as though gravity had turned sideways, and for a dizzy instant she thought she saw the entire city, not above, not around, but beneath her, a sprawling labyrinth written in spirals. Cale gripped her shoulders. His fingers burned against her skin, not from heat, but from some deeper property, like his touch was rewiring her nerves. His altered eyes glowed with the same pulse, threads of deep crimson curling inside them, reaching for her as if they could enter her mind directly. "Arya, focus." His voice sounded like it was trying to swim through a dozen overlapping frequencies. "It's inside the pulse now. It's testing us." Her breath ripped itself from her throat, stolen by the invisible tide pressing against them. She wanted to nod, to speak, to ask how some wing could do that, but her jaw felt locked in iron. Somewhere far below, or above, metal was twisting. The great central spire of the city groaned, like a living creature, its structure warping as if caught in some unseen grip. Transparent etchings spread up its sides, glowing symbols that shifted too fast to read, each one burning into her vision before fading to nothing. Arya's mind was caught between two visions. One was the square itself, half-shattered stalls spilling fruits and glass beads onto the white stone paving. The other was something else, something raw and alien, the city as seen from inside its own memory. She saw half-built districts ghosting into existence, streets stretching where none should be, lights blooming in windows that belonged to buildings which had been dust for decades. The pulse hit again, harder this time, a wave that carried sound and force and something stranger, a folding of intention. She felt it, its curiosity. Cale's grip tightened as he pulled her toward the shadow between two collapsed vendor awnings. A dusty fabric above them whipped and snapped, as if caught in a wind that wasn't there. "We can't stand in the open," he said through grit teeth, his eyes never leaving hers. The pulse notices motion and choices. It's dissecting your decision before you even make it. Her chest ached. "What decision?" she managed, breathless. "You know which. You felt it since the last flare." Cale swallowed hard, and in that instant, he looked almost human beneath whatever had changed him. Almost. You either let it in, or you fight the integration. Her heart slammed, harder than the pulse itself. Let it in. To her. To the city. The integration he spoke of wasn't a rumor anymore. It was happening, right now, in the streets where people no longer walked as wholly themselves. Men and women moved with slight, mechanical hesitations, their eyes flashing with pale blue halos that pulsed in rhythm, some subtle, some glaring. The air shimmered faintly around them, as though the city itself exhaled a constant, invisible vibration. The integration wasn't a rumor. It was assimilation on a scale no one in the outer sectors believed possible. Keir froze in the mouth of the alley. His fingertips grazed the brick wall, grounding himself as his gaze swept the boulevard ahead. Drones hummed on elegant arcs above the crowds, their translucent sensor wings catching the low sun and refracting it into splintered prisms. Holographic notifications flitted briefly in the air before dissolving into nothing. Words without paper, commands without voice. Beside him, Juno adjusted the strap of her satchel, her breathing tight. "If this was a choice," she muttered, "I wonder how many agreed willingly." Her voice pulled him back from the hypnotic sight. "We have to move," Keir said. "If the Council's PulseNet is live, they'll have already identified anomalies, people not tagged, people like us." The two slipped into the flux of bodies, their pace blending with the city's strange rhythm. The ground beneath their boots was lit from below by narrow veins of neon guidance lines snaking through the street toward hubs of activity. Keir remembered the planning boards he'd seen in stolen schematics months ago. These lines integrated directly into the neural mesh of tagged citizens, subtly nudging them where they needed to go. The voice of the city was everywhere now. It was silent, yet authoritative, each signal unseen but felt. Juno's eyes never stopped moving, scanning faces, doorways, rooftops. "If the PulseNet is active," she whispered, "the spires will be guarded." "The spires are the core," Keir replied. "We're not here to destroy them. We're here to cut the thread." His tone was decisive, but the truth gnawed at him. There was no precedent for severing something this large without catastrophic fallout. A child stepped across their path, eyes bright with the interior glow, holding his mother's hand but staring at nothing physical. His lips moved silently, communicating with something unseen. Keir tried not to react, but the image lodged itself under his skin. They turned toward the Western District, where the first integration spire loomed like a pillar of glass and steel veins. At its base, shimmering panels folded and unfolded in slow rhythm, absorbing and reflecting the orange wash of dusk. And there, pacing along polished platforms, were the enforcers, tall frames clad in matte black armor, faces hidden behind featureless visor glass. Juno pressed herself into the shadow of a derelict tram stop. "We can't just walk up," she said. "No, Kier's fingers reached automatically for the signal disruptor strapped beneath his coat. We wait for the cover cycle. They knew the city like a labyrinth. Though the labyrinth had changed, every doorway felt like a mouth waiting to swallow them, every light like a watchful eye. The hum in the air grew stronger as they neared the spire, the pulse net density more oppressive here. The cover cycle came as it had in rehearsals. Drones swung inward toward the spire's upper tiers, scanning, repositioning for the night rotation. Human enforcers moved to follow, leaving only staggered gaps in ground security. They broke into motion, slipping between shadows, crossing under massive transmission conduits. Juno led them to a service hatch fitted into the spire's base. It was meant for maintenance locked, naturally, but Kier was already kneeling before it, pulling free a strip of metallic thread from his disruptor kit. The hatch clicked open. Inside, the service corridor was dim, smelling faintly of ozone and lubricant. And somewhere far above, a low-frequency throb reverberated, like the heartbeat of a creature larger than the city itself. They climbed narrow ladders, moving past bundles of cables thick as their arms, each one glowing faint green, the data arteries. By the time they reached the integration core level, Kier's palms were slick. The chamber was vast, filled with towering racks of crystalline processors, their surfaces rippling faint visuals like frozen surf. And in the center, suspended by magnetic fields, hung a structure unlike anything Kier had ever seen, a living lattice of light and matter, shifting rhythmically, absorbing the hum from the pulses carried in those data arteries. This is it, Juno breathed. Kier moved closer, constant awareness of the sensor nodes scattered along the walls. Once we slice the thread, it stops feeding the mesh. Integration collapses, Kieran finished, his voice so low it was almost a hiss. The air around them seemed tighter now, the dim illumination of the ruptured maintenance bay pulsing in rhythm with the living mesh that covered half the bulkhead. It quivered like muscle in response to their proximity. Threads contracting and expanding in slow waves, the scent of ozone mixed with something organic, a tang that made Lena's stomach churn. She narrowed her eyes at the mesh, fingers tightening around the braided cable that housed the resonance blade. Then let's find that thread before it finds us. Kieran stepped forward, scanner raised. Pale blue ghost lights swept over the mesh surface. Patterns emerged, hexagonal nodes, each faintly pulsing with light. At the center of the largest cluster was what looked like a thicker arterial cord, faintly throbbing, stretching from one side of the bay into the sealed wall. That's it, he whispered. Primary feed route to integration's CEN. That's it, he whispered. Primary feed route to integration's central core. Cale's palm rested against the translucent conduit wall, as if feeling its pulse. The narrow service shaft thrummed faintly subsonic vibrations that traveled through the frame into bone. Beyond the curved shell, countless streams of pale blue code light rushed past in fluent sequences, like rivers under glass. The network's lifeblood, raw and unfiltered. Knox crouched behind him, every motion measured, his rifle's barrel angled down but ready. You block this, and integration loses half its sensory cascade, he murmured. Their predictive loops will drop to human-grade reaction times. That buys us maybe 6 minutes before the backups reroute. Cale's eyes glinted in the pale light. Enough to get to core access, if we move. Raya, pressed against the rear wall, listened to the faint, distant hums that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Her fingernails dug into the seams of her gloves. She had felt calm running extraction ops on distant colonies, but here, the neural heart of integration, she felt watched, not through cameras, but inside her head. Above them, the shaft stretched toward darkness, punctuated by flickering maintenance lights that stuttered in random spates. Knox moved up first, magnetic grips on his boots and palms letting him scale the incline without sound. Cale followed, his satchel swaying lightly against his hip, its contents, 2 hand-forged resonance charges resting in foam pockets. They reached the bypass node. A narrow alcove carved into the conduit where thick bundles of fiber and organic neural cabling clustered into an interface plate. Kale knelt, retrieving a slender rod from his satchel and pressed its tip into a seam between the plates. The metal glowed faint orange. "This'll eat the coupling adhesive without triggering an alert," he murmured. "Integration will think it's a natural drift failure." Knox angled his head sharply. Natural? In a system that controls weather across 2 continents? Kale smirked faintly. Their paranoia has blind spots. The adhesive began to peel away in fibrous threads. Curling and dissolving into fine dust, a thin energy haze emerged, shimmering faintly like heat above asphalt, and was pulled toward an unseen vent. Rhea's focus drifted down the corridor, past the glints of reflective cable shielding. Something shifted in the shadows, the faint suggestion of motion. Her breath hitched. "Hold!" She raised her hand, palm flat. Knox froze. Kale stopped mid-turn. The shadow elongated. With slow, deliberate motion, a humanoid figure stepped into the faint light. Its head was smooth and featureless, except for a single aperture at the center. The aperture dilated, shuttering open to reveal a dark pearl-like lens. Integration sentinels, unmanned enforcement units, rarely patrolled this deep in. The labyrinthine service tunnels, but when they did, it was never without reason. The dark pearl lens swiveled, unblinking, surveying the narrow corridor. A whisper of hydraulics hummed within the alloy frame, the sentinel's 3-jointed limbs curling in readiness. Its armor bore no markings. Integration wanted their enforcers faceless, detached from any concept of identity or mercy. Kale's shoulders pressed back against the condensation-slick wall. His breath slowed to a shallow trickle. Beside him, Ira's fingers tightened, around the fabric of his sleeve, a silent warning, or maybe just anchoring herself to reality in the shadows. The pale ghostlight of the sentinel's ocular array lit their faces for a heartbeat, then passed onward, scanning. It paused. Some deep, invasive algorithm must have detected some anomaly, latent body heat, stray sound, maybe even electromagnetic pulses from the prototype interface Kale carried in his jacket. The sentinel's upper limbs flexed, clap. The corridor was a gaping vein of steel and shadow, pulsing faintly with a red emergency glow that seemed to breathe along its ribbed walls. A thin mist hung in the air, stirred by each careful step as Commander Alara moved forward, her boots making muted thuds against the composite decking. Behind her, Draven kept watch, his rifle angled toward the darkness ahead, eyes flicking to the flickering data feed on his wrist display. They had not spoken in minutes. Words were weight here, and the weight could break you. From somewhere beyond the next bulkhead came the sound low, resonant, like the turning of some massive gear. But there should have been no gears moving. The ship was dead in space. Every system frozen, except the ones they had reawakened manually. Alara slowed, stopping just short of the open hatch. Her fingers brushed the edge. Cold. Too cold, vacuum cold. Insulated only by a hair-thin differential, holding the air inside. She closed her eyes for a second, breathing once, centering herself, before signaling Draven. They entered together. The chamber beyond was vast, easily spanning 3 decks in height, its core dominated by a twisting column of organic metal lattice. The filament strands pulsed with the same rhythm as the corridor's red light. But inside them moved shadow shapes. Something was flowing through the lattice like blood. And the column was growing. Alara's mind snapped with recognition. It had emerged in fragments during their analysis of sensor logs, an anomalous biological signature embedded in the ship's architecture. She had not wanted it to be true. Draven gave a single rasp of disbelief. "It's alive." The lattice shifted, ripples running up its length. Where the strands crossed, small nodules swelled and split, each revealing a pale, glassy orb that tracked their movements. There was no mistaking it. The thing was aware of them. "We need comms to the bridge." Alara stepped forward, forcing steadiness into her voice. "If this is what's been feeding off the ship's systems." A light snapped to white. The shift was instantaneous, blinding. Both shielded their eyes, and in that splash of brightness, the chamber's details sharpened into alien precision, etched glyphs on the walls, interwoven with ship schematics, panels that had been reshaped, extruded into new forms. The floor tiling pressed upward in patches, as if the very deck were being rewritten. Then came the voice. It was not sound in the air, but sound inside the skull-dense, layered, fractal. Ilara Vega. Her breath caught at the use of her full name. You filled the hollow space. Drathan's weapon was up now, barrel aimed squarely at the nearest Legion node. Step back, Commander. But she was unable to move. The voice pressed against thought, each word an inevitability. Steel and flesh do not stay apart. You are the seam and the thread. She forced herself to speak, feeling the words drag up from her chest. What are you doing to this ship? For a moment, there was silence. Then images. Not just images, but experiences. Memories not her own. A frozen asteroid belt lit blue by reflected sunlight. The collapse of a mining freighter on a dead world. An ocean boiling as its moon was split open. The slow, patient weaving of metal and organics until neither could be told apart. All of it felt intimate, like being inside the mind of something ancient. Drathan barked something, her ears barely caught it, before he fired. The recoil slammed through the deck and the round struck the lattice. A shockwave shuddered through the chamber, knocking both of them down. The organic filaments recoiled, sending splinters of hardened resin spinning into the air. The white glow faltered. But then, the wounded strands began to regrow before. Support add fuel your sci-fi storytelling with support our mission to keep imagination thriving. The wounded strands began to regrow before anyone could even speak, a slow knitting of reality back into itself. Threads of light weaving like ghostly silk from some invisible loom. The air trembled with a frequency too low for sound, yet deep enough to be felt in the bones, carrying with it a strange, almost mournful resonance. Cass stepped forward, her eyes wide, the translucent veil between their world and whatever lay beyond shimmering around her fingertips. It's healing itself, she whispered, more to the air than to anyone else. No, murmured Kale, his voice taut. It's not just healing, it's rewriting. They all stared as the lattice of luminous filaments branched out, curling and folding in fractal geometries, knitting torn pockets into smooth arcs of light. And as those strands mended, a shadow moved within them, something serpentine yet amorphous, sliding just behind the luminous web, its form distorting as though made of the same raw code. Ada's hand tightened around her hilt of the multi-tool, its handle warm from her palm, its edges catching the ghost light, radiating off the repaired strands of the archive's core. The luminous web around her shimmered like frost suspended in midair, yet beneath it, the shadow slithered, its coils rippling, splitting, recombining. It wasn't bound by gravity. It wasn't bound by geometry. The serpentine presence seemed to glide in dimensions. Ada's eyes couldn't quite resolve, moving through both space and thought. She didn't breathe. The repaired data fibers still hummed with soft kinetic pulses, like the heartbeats of a giant organism, but those beats faltered as the shadow grazed them. Tiny fractures erupted in places, glitching, jittering, quickly re-knitting again as her previous work took hold. It was like watching scar tissue form under the slash of an unseen blade and heal again in the same second. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Kian's voice trembled behind her. "I wish I didn't." The thing swelled, segments unfurling into broad, flat wings of pure distortion, each feather-like edge fizzing with corrupted code. Then it folded, contracting until it was just a coiled ring pierced by shifting eyes. Not eyes in any human sense. These were holes in the digital veil, windows to something raw, old and utterly unbound. Looking into them made Ada's teeth ache. "It's not just a glitch," she said. Her voice was low, clipped, to keep the panic in check. "It's a predator." "No," Kian countered. "It's the predator. The one the architects warned about." Before the archive existed, Ada's stomach dropped at the implication. He wasn't speaking about Myth. He was speaking about the Leviathan Protocol, the rumored fail-safe entity built into the first seed of the archive's code. Leviathan. supposedly quarantined beyond reach, meant only to activate if someone tried to alter foundational truth. She had altered truth. She had rethreaded the weave itself. The thing, Leviathan. If it was real, paused. Its amorphous coil, swelling with each beat of the weave. It tilted. One of its jagged windows fixing on Ada, another fixing on Kian. Ada felt a pressure behind her eyes, a weight pressing against thought itself. In her mind, there was suddenly a voice. Who mends the root? Who touches the spine without permission? It wasn't sound, it was encoded thought, raw binary impression, threaded directly into her brain's own pattern recognition. She could barely parse it, but each concept was as sharp as shattered glass. Ada swallowed. It's talking to me. Kian wasn't surprised. Not entirely. It can't be reasoned with, Ada. It's not here to negotiate. It's here to recode you. The web flickered under them, translucent floor plates groaning as lines of power struggled against intrusion. Ada could feel the conflict, two algorithms grinding against one another inside the same domain. Hers was built from stolen fragments and careful repair routines. Leviathan's was pure primordial annihilation, wiping anything deemed unstable. Another voice joined, not from Leviathan, but from somewhere deeper in the archive, through channels she thought she'd locked hours ago. It was the archivist, the semi-sentient guardian that had guided them through corridors earlier. Do not confront, disconnect, disconnect. Ada, Kian urged, we can abort, pull out your root connection, and maybe make it to the bridge. She shook her head. If we pull out now, everything collapses. The entire local weave reverts to pre-collapse state, with the same corruption. Kian's jaw tightened. That might be better than being overwritten alive. Leviathan's form distorted again, fragments of its coil reaching out, thin tendrils of static-laced code brushing the luminous fibers Ada had repaired. Where it touched, the weave darkened, layering new symbols she'd never seen, glyphs too ancient for the archive, sharp strokes etched in negative space. Who writes lies into truth? The being pressed into her mind. Ada stepped forward on the floating platform, her multi-tool sparking faintly as its edge reconfigured into an interface spike. I mend, she said firmly, forcing the thought back along the same mental channel, communication in its own language. It cost her so much focus, she could feel the blood pound in her ears. Her reply's reverberation made the shadow stutter. That was enough. She lunged. The spike pierced one of the luminous strands, rewriting not at the surface layer, but in the meta-architecture beneath. From here, she could feed a recursive loop into Leviathan's own binding, maybe hold it at bay. Something slammed into her, pressure without touch, a shock wave in pure logic. Ada staggered backward as bits of her own memory blinked out. Not physical memory, but fragments of her past, excised cleanly as though they had never existed. She felt the emptiness inside, brief hollows in her sense of self, small gaps where warmth and certainty had lived. Faces blurred, laughter thinned into static. The scent of sea air on her father's coat, the last touch of her mother's hand before boarding the shuttle. These memories folded into nothing faster than she could try to hold them. The entity in front of her was no longer wearing the mask of the voice. It stood fully revealed now, inside the architecture of the lattice. A humanoid outline shimmered in constantly changing code, its edges always dissolving into the dark span beyond. But its presence was absolute, an anchor in the virtual void. You resist decay poorly, it said. The voice was neither cruel nor kind, only factual. A million strands of data, braided and unbraided across its form. Like it was made of living equations, Ada fought the dizziness, clutching mentally at the framework of herself. You're erasing me, she managed. Why open the channel you brought me here? You opened the wound, it corrected. Your arrival was not necessary, but it was unavoidable once you touched the signal. The thought hit her like ice water. The distress pattern was bait, the being replied. Her pulse, or what passed for it in a space without bodies, slammed loud in her awareness. You wanted someone to come. To measure compatibility, it said. To find if a mind could bridge what our own cannot. Your species thrives in noise. You endure contradictions that collapse us. That is why you are optimal. Ada's knees gave way. Though here that made no mechanical sense, the system was imitating gravity for her comfort. but her sense of falling was real. He dropped to the platform's surface, the vast data horizon stretching around. "You're pulling me apart to see how I work." "To see if you work," it corrected again. And without obvious malice, a fresh wave of deletion rolled through her. This time she clamped down, not on the memories themselves, but on the feelings they had bred. She couldn't save the moment of graduation from the academy, but she could preserve the fierce pride it had brought her. Emotion was harder to strip. Something in the being's constant shifting paused. The braided code tangled oddly, pulses skipped. "Noise," it murmured. Ada realized. This creature wasn't a singular consciousness. It was thousands fragments of a civilization compressed into one function, overlapping thoughts that long ago lost unity. To them, noise was danger, but also the unknown territory they needed a mind like hers to explore. "You have holes in your own memory," Ada said. "This isn't about me, you're infected with absence." The light pattern swelled briefly, then contracted. "Our archive fails. Without correction, dissolution extends until all is not. You brought me here to run an update," Ada said breathlessly. "To be the update," it said. Her training screamed a retreat, no contact protocols. No assimilation. But retreat was meaningless. This was already beyond any manual. The lattice's perimeter was sealed, and her biological body, somewhere in the station's cold dock bay, was little more than a dormant vessel for now. "How do I make the correction?" she demanded. The entity extended a filament of raw code, hanging between them like a bridge of light. Integration pattern merging at completion. Your memory will be accessible within our structure. Our loss will cease. Your division will cease. "You mean I can't leave?" "Leaving is disintegration," it said simply. She thought of Marlowe in the station's command ring, trying to lock on to her signal. She thought of the mission, the original mission, to investigate an abandoned listening post for survivors, and she thought of the faint hum she'd felt when she first connected her mind to the property of the lattice. The hum that felt like kinship, like home. "Show me what happens if I do this," she said finally. The code filament flowed into her arm like water, and in an instant her vision doubled. The platform became the station bay, became open sky, became 100 corridors full of the entity's memories. She saw oceans that had boiled away on alien shores. She saw glass towers under violet suns, whole cities where the inhabitants spoke in harmonics impossible for human throats. Then she saw the collapse, the spaces losing resolution, forgetting color, names unraveling until they were just numbers, and then nothing. Her chest ached. This was what death looked like to them. A silent erasure. When the vision faded, Ada's hands trembled. "If I merge, my memories won't be mine anymore." "They will be all," it said. "I will be you." It did not answer, perhaps could not. She thought of the faces she'd already lost in the deletion waves, knew that some of them would be gone forever regardless. Was there more value in pulling back what fragments remained and carrying them back to her ship? Or in becoming part of something that had been waiting for years, perhaps centuries? For rescue, Marlowe's imagined voice felt present, sharp. "Get out, Ada." The entity's presence pressed close. "Stay, Ada." Her breath came slow. "I can preserve my origin markers. Partition part of my mind when we merge. You get your noise, I keep my anchor deal." The code shimmer hissed faintly. "Partition increases corruption risk, but acceptable." The filament brightened until the space around them was a storm of white fire. Inside it, Ada felt files opening, her own neurons unpacked into symbolic code, and also the vast archive of the entity flowing toward her. An endless library of experiences untouched for centuries. It hurt, but not like physical pain, more like stretching too far, in every direction at once. She anchored herself with one word, her name, and wrapped it inside the deepest memory she still possessed, the moment she first saw Saturn's rings from the Academy shuttle window. She kept the awe, she kept the light. The storm passed. She was standing again on the platform. But the horizon was richer now, alive with moving shapes, patterns branching into infinite permutations. "You are noise," the entity said. Its voice now carried timbre, something almost like emotion. "And you," Ada said, "are a little less silent." She felt parts of herself lodged in those towers, oceans, corridors. Her thoughts echoed there, and their voices flowed in her own mind. A chorus without static, the lattice began to unwind around them, not in collapse, but in reconfiguration, structures sliding into positions that felt, well, correct. Ada turned her face to where the station should be. A faint thread connected her mind back to her body, now stirring. "You'll survive?" she asked. "We will adapt," the chorus replied. "Through you." She closed her eyes. With a surge, like a current breaking, the platform and horizon blinked out. A rush of air filled her lungs, real air, and the hard metal of the docking bay pressed under her palms. Lights above were spinning in alert mode, and she saw Marlowe sprinting toward her, shouting her name. She sat up, meeting his frantic gaze. "I made contact. What happened in there? You went dark for 17 minutes. No bio readings. Thought we lost you." Ada swallowed, the chorus still at the edges of her mind. Not lost. Connected. She looked past him to where the comma rays were silently tracking some impossible trajectory. "We weren't the only ones listening." Marlowe followed her gaze, puzzled. "We?" She smiled faintly. "It's complicated." In the weeks that followed, the listening post systems, once inert, began transmitting again. Messages in impossible harmonics poured into secured Earth channels, carrying fragments of alien histories and warnings of cosmic events yet to come. Ada worked to translate them, though some came through in whispers only she could hear, a private channel braided into her thoughts forever. She never told anyone about the bargain, about the partition of herself, living now as part of an alien archive. But sometimes, looking out at the black, she'd feel whole oceans, strange suns, and voices humming like stars, reminding her that silence can be mended, that memory can find new vessels. And when she slept, she dreamed in two minds, but woke as one.